If you've got those notes, I encourage you, pull those out. We're going to be hopefully giving you some things that you can write down, take with you today as we talk and continue our series, Great Choices, Great Life. We launched this at the beginning of the year. We have been through 3 primary decisions of great decisions in your life. The first one is to make God your highest priority. Would you say that with me? Make God my highest priority. That is, above all else, the greatest decision you can ever make. And as we've talked about this, the reason we started with that is everything hinges off of that. The following week, we talked about how to build a great marriage. And if you weren't here for that and you're married, or even if you're thinking about getting married, I'd encourage you, maybe hop online. You can watch that on our YouTube channel. I'd encourage you, even better yet, go through Ephesians chapter 5, read through the qualifications of what God has laid out as the blueprint for a healthy married life. And then last week, we talked about finances. And as Ryan mentioned, we got Financial Peace that's kicking off tonight. I encourage you to get a part of that if you haven't done so. But today, I want to talk to you about what I believe is another key important factor in our lives. Our small group is going through the book of 1 Samuel. And if you're familiar with that story of what takes place in the book of 1 Samuel, you'll know it really starts with a guy by the name of Eli. Eli is the priest, the high priest. He is the leader of Israel, and he has 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. And these 2 guys are going to, should take over the priesthood after Eli dies. But the problem is there are a couple of scoundrels. There are a couple of guys that are abusing the system, taking advantage of the Israelite people, taking advantage of God's people when they come and offer sacrifices. They're taking the parts that they shouldn't of the sacrifices. Now, as a priest, you were enabled to take certain pieces of the offering to have. That's what you were sustained by and fed by. But these guys were doing it in a manner that did not honor God. And not only that, they were sleeping with the girls who were helping in the temple as well, in the tabernacle there. And it became a very sickening situation, so much so that God rebuked Eli because Eli didn't address the issue with his kids. And God said, this is what's going to take place. Your kids are going to go into battle, probably a battle that they shouldn't have been in to begin with, and they're going to die on the same day. And sure enough, both of his kids die. The Ark of the Covenant of God is taken. Eli himself is sitting in a chair when a messenger comes to him and tells him, your kids have been killed and the Ark of God has been taken. It says Eli was a very fat man, fell back and broke his neck. He died, and that same day his daughter-in-law died too, bearing children. Now, I say all that to say to you, family dynamics are important. Anybody here believe that family dynamics are important? And how we structure our homes is extremely important. And as I read through that, just in the book of 1 Samuel, let me just go back for just a brief moment and talk to you about other family dynamics that we see. It starts with Adam and Eve, and Adam gets caught in sin. He immediately starts blaming his wife Eve for it, right? And then blaming God. Later on, they have a couple of kids. You guys remember the story, right? Cain and Abel. And one of them kills the other because of jealousy and rage and disapproval that he feels that he's got from God. Later on, there's a couple of brothers, Jacob and Esau, that are born. They're twins, and there's a constant rivalry going on in that family dynamic between those 2 brothers. Part of the big reason is because one's a daddy's boy. His name is Esau or Edom. He was red. Esau means he was hairy. He was kind of like a Sasquatch guy, I guess, I'm assuming here. And his brother Jacob, guess who he was loved by? He was a mama's boy, and that created a huge tension, so much so that Esau wanted to kill his brother Jacob. Jacob ran for his life. He ends up getting introduced to somebody that is ultimately going to be his father-in-law. He asks this guy for his daughter in marriage, and if you read the story, this father-in-law tricks him and gives him the other daughter instead of the one he asked for. How that all happens, I'm not 100% sure, but you can read the story, and then he ends up with 2 wives. Crazy stuff's going on all over the place, and then you continue the story with a man by the name of Joseph who has a multitude of brothers that hate him and despise him and that sell him off as a slave and lie to their dad that their brother Joseph was killed by a wild animal. Any dysfunction going on? And that's just in the book of Genesis. Listen to me. That's the first book of the Bible. I know some of you like to watch As the World Turns and Santa Barbara and whatever else like that. Those guys don't have anything on what God has already written. They're just stealing from him. You want to be entertained. You want to know stuff. And I want to tell you this. The Bible isn't saying that's the way to do things. Not everything in the Bible is prescriptive. It is oftentimes descriptive of what we shouldn't have. We would all sit back and we realize, looking at other people's families, maybe even looking at our own families, the importance of developing and building a great, not a house, but but a home, a place of family, a place of relationship. And for some of you right now, if I ask this question, do you have a great home today? Do you have a great family? Probably most of us go, I've got a pretty good family. Is it great? I don't know if it's great. For some of us, if we're honest, do you have an okay? Yeah, our family's kind of mediocre. It's not really good. For some of you, if you're really honest and candid, you'd come in here and go, my family's not great at all. It's terrible. And although I can tell you this, nowhere that I've found does the Bible give us a blueprint of how to build a house. It sure has a lot to say of how to build a great home. And that's what I want to give you guys this morning. So as we dive in, I want to encourage you. We're in the book of Proverbs. We've been navigating through the book of Proverbs. We're going to throw up a lot of stuff there in regards to Proverbs this morning. But actually where I want you to turn is to Ephesians chapter 6 and find yourselves there. And I'm going to have you turn to another portion. We're going to walk through what the scriptures tell us about how to build a solid family foundation. And not only that, but the impact of how to engage with one another. Now, I know for some of you right now, you're thinking to yourself, well, what if I'm not in the stage of life? Because you're probably just going to talk to parents of kids, younger kids that are still living at home, and then you're probably going to talk to kids maybe a little bit bright. No. If anybody here a kid of somebody? Anybody here at all? A kid of somebody? Okay, fantastic. About half of you. How does that work itself out? We have things that God prescribes to us to tell us how to operate as kids. For many of us, you are parents. Just out of a quick show of hands, how many of you are blessed to be parents here in this room? A lot of you. And there are some descriptions that God gives us of how to do that. Many of you have even a greater blessing. The old statement, right, that the blessing of grandchildren that's the blessing that you get for not killing your own children, right? That's a great thing. Some of you are grandparents here today. And there's some truth that we can grab a hold of in the scriptures that has something to say to us about how to be a great grandparent. If you're a child here today living in your parents' household, I want to encourage you, there's some truth that we're going to talk about today. If you're a sibling, if you have distant relatives, which all of us fit into some camp here, and if by nothing else, when God talks about his church, do you know how he refers to us? His family. Look around for a moment. These are your brothers and sisters. You're going to be spending eternity. You might as well start getting along now, right? So these are some truths that I want to give you this morning of how you and I can build a great family environment. So hopefully you found yourselves in Ephesians chapter 6. If you haven't done so, Ephesians is in the New Testament. You can go right past the first 39 books of the Old. You're going to find Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Then you're going to hit Acts and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, and there you'll find Ephesians. You'll find a lot of IANSs. And once you get past that, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, you've gone too far. Hang a quick left. So let me give you a couple of things before we get into Ephesians chapter 6 on building a solid foundation. Hopefully you're taking notes, writing some of these things down. Number one, make God the highest priority. Would you say that with me? Make God the highest priority. Now, I know what many of you are saying. You say, Brian, that's what we talked about on week 1. Yes, it is, because it's what everything hinges upon. It really does. If you get nothing else from this series, if you only get one thing, make it this: the greatest choice that I can make in my life for me, for my marriage, for my children, for my finances, for my friends, for my workplace, for all the decisions of my life is to make God the number one priority. Listen to what it says in chapter 15, verse 16 in Proverbs. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. We spent a whole week dialoguing about it, so I'm not going to do it again, of how do we put God as first in our personal lives. Spending time with him regularly, seeking him in prayer, being part of community, reading God's word on a consistent basis. And you know, when a family does that, it starts to build on the proper and the right foundation. Do you spend time praying, husbands and wives? Do you spend time praying, kids and parents? Maybe you got relatives in the home that are living with you. Is church a priority? And I'm not just talking about church coming, but is it an investment that you say, God, if somebody was to look at my life, they would see that God is my highest priority in everything that I do. The second one is this: demonstrate love. Would you just say that with me? Demonstrate love. You want to build on a solid foundation for your family? Demonstrate love. Proverbs 15:17 says this: better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. Some of you guys are like, I don't like that verse, actually. That sounds terrible, right? And you got to realize, what is God saying here? Better a small plate with vegetables on it. Who likes vegetables here? I know some of you vegan, whatever you're called, vegetarian, whatever their term is now. You're like, oh, I love them. You know, I love cauliflower, I love broccoli, whatever. You do not. You eat it because you've made choices like that, and then you try and make everybody else convinced that it's good. It's not good. How about a plate of Brussels sprouts, right? Oh, now I hit it. Yeah, Brussels sprouts, nasty. For some of you, peas, right? A whole little plate, a small, did you catch that? A small serving. And some of you are like, that's actually the best kind. I don't want a big serving. A small serving of peas. How about asparagus, right? Asparagus is nasty. I don't know. That is so disgusting. It really is. I mean, I like a lot of vegetables, but this is what God's trying to do. Look at it in comparison to something. Better a small plate of vegetables than with love, than a fattened calf. Oh, than a big old plate with, you know what I'm talking about, right? A ribeye that comes across, a filet mignon. No, that's not what it is, right? And you just see this huge thing, and some of you guys are like, man, the Bible's coming alive right now to me for the first time. Or maybe better yet, a tri-tip from Swingles. Oh, now I hit the mark, right? Kona, right? Oh, man. And this is what God says. Better a small plate of asparagus with some love than a huge and asparagus is so nasty. It is so gross. Now, I know what's going to happen. I'm not going to stand out front because 2 or 3 of you are going to come up and you're just going to be like, Brian, the reason you don't like asparagus is you've just never had it prepared the right way before, right? And I'm going to say, how do you do it? Well, I put olive oil on it, and then I smother it with salt and pepper and a cube of butter, and I throw cheese all over the top, and it's delicious. And your urine stinks, or whatever's going on, right? And this is what God's saying. Better to have a small plate of asparagus with a stinky house of your asparagus urine than a tri-tip where there is difficulty and hatred going on. Somebody made note of this. Who can forget Winston Churchill's immortal words? We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. He said, that sounds exactly like our family vacation, right? And the truth is, if we're honest, that is some of our homes. It's constantly fighting. And we're filled with hatred, not love towards one another. Unfortunately, that happens in a lot of church environments too. But if we get to a spot where we say one of God's greatest aims in me laying a foundation for a healthy home, for a great home life, is loving my spouse, loving my kids, loving my parents, loving my siblings. And God, because you're first place in my life, I'm going to strive to do that rather than harboring bitterness, harboring hatred, harboring anger. Which one describes your family life, your home life more? Because you want to lay a great foundation for a healthy home. Put God first and demonstrate love towards one another in your words, in your actions, in your service towards one another. Because we all know at the end of the day, yeah, it really is better to have a small plate of something I don't even like to eat. But there's love in this house than to have it all. And it's just turmoil all the time. And I know because I've heard the stories, some of you are in it. You've got all the sorts of things. You got everything you want in life, you think, except you don't have love. And you don't have Christ as the firm foundation. The third thing here is cultivate peace. Cultivate peace. A similar statement here is this in Proverbs 17:1. Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Do you understand what God's communicating? It's not about all the stuff in life. It's about having a healthy home, not everything that fills up a house. Right relationships, There was a couple of kids, they were up in the attic reading old letters that their parents had read to each other or written to each other years ago, going through the old files. And one of the brothers said to one of the girls, he said, wow, these aren't the names they call each other now. Some of you just got that. So there was a sitcom on years ago, Everybody Loves Raymond. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. There's a lot of family dynamics in that sitcom that are somewhat comical. But there's one particular show that they entitled The Angry Family. And in that, there is a household of a husband and wife. They lived across the street from his mom and dad. And they had twin boys and a girl living in the home. And the scene starts and opens with one of their twin boys in a classroom, and he's about to give he wrote a story. All the kids in the class had to write a little story, and so one of them's talking about astronauts, and they've made these coloring books and everything along those lines. And then their son gets up there, and he opens up his book, and he says, and the teacher asks, well, what's the name of your story? He goes, it's called The Angry Family. And then he begins to say these words. The daddy was mad at the mommy. The mommy was mad at the daddy. The mommy and daddy were very mad at the grandpa. And the grandpa got mad at everybody. And the grown-ups were always very loud, and they hurt the kids' ears. The end. And he's reading this in front of a huge room of other parents, and you can imagine the shame in that moment that Ray and Deborah felt. I wonder if our lives were broadcast. If that's kind of what be reminiscent of what was said of us. Or is it, man, there's peace. These are a people that love one another. They care for one another. They take care of one another. Now, the truth is there's always going to be strife, right? There's always going to be challenges. One person once said this, the man who seldom finds himself in hot water, well, he's the man who has one wife, several daughters, and just one bathroom. So, it's going to happen. We're going to find ourselves in sticky situations at times. But are we there to create peace, to create harmony, to create love in our household? Proverbs 30:33 says this, for as churning cream produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. What's your household look like? Is it built on the foundations of God first, love, and peace? There's another proverb that says, starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So just drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. For some of us, it's like we're always looking for a fight. And you create that in your home. How many of you want peace and quiet in your house? Anybody? Then let's strive for that. Is this making sense right now so far? Build it on Christ, build it on love, and build it on peace. And so I want to spend just a few moments out of Ephesians chapter 6 talking about if you are a child today, what are some great choices that you can make as a kid? And I always get asked this question of, okay, well, Brian, when do I stop becoming a kid and now I'm an adult and I do my own things, right? For those of you who don't know, we have 5 children in our household. Not in our household anymore. We have 5 kids. One of them just recently was married about a year and a half ago, and we have 4 others that continue to stay in the house. And you guys know how this goes. For those of you who've been on the journey for longer than I have, your kids hit about that 16, 17, 18 mark, and especially the 18 mark, and you hear the words, right? I am now on a what? An adult, yes. And so now it's like, okay, so I don't have a curfew anymore, right? I said, well, where did you get that crazy idea? Of course you have a curfew. Well, can it be extended? Sure, we'll move it to 8:45, right? So the reality is, you get these moments, right, of this rebuttal. Well, I'm an adult now. I can go to the store and I can buy cigarettes. I said, oh, no, you can't. But the reality is, right, all of these things, and here's my statement to this, because this question comes up a lot. Adulthood is not about an age. Let me be very clear about that, at least in the Lopez home. I can't find this in the Bible except in Second Hesitations. It's in there. That's not a book of the Bible. So, but what I'm saying is this. In our household, you are an adult when you behave like an adult. And an adult behaves in a manner where they take responsibility for their behavior. So when I have a conversation with a child who is 18, 19 years of age, and they say, well, I don't think I should have a curfew. I said, well, it doesn't matter what you think. Well, I'm an adult. Well, if you are an adult and you do not want a curfew, then you can find a place to rent. You can pay all your bills. You can pay for your phone. You can pay for your all total insurance. We help our kids out with those. By the way, if you don't have a kid driving yet and you know what insurance costs are going to be, you better be a millionaire right now just to help them pay for their insurance costs. And you can pay for your own food. And you can pay. When you start doing those things, you are now an adult. Until that, as long as you are under our roof, we have guidelines and authority over your life, and you will like it, right? So that's just how this works. And I know some of you are disagreeing with me, because for some of us in here, you're 25 years old, and I'm lovingly going to say this, and you're still not an adult. Some of you are 30 years old, 35 years old, and you're not acting as an adult because you're not taking responsibility yet for your life. That's adulthood. It's not an age. So Ephesians chapter 6, what do I do as a kid to make great decisions? If you are in the home, you're still living at home, this is really pertinent for you. But I believe it is also, if you still have your parents living, it is pertinent for us as well, no matter what stage of life you are in. The first is this: honor your parents. Would you just say that with me? It's so important. Honor your parents. It's what we are called by God to do. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with the promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. It's this idea of giving weight to them, that you value them, you show them proper respect. I got to be honest, I've seen some of you that have, over the course of the last several years since I've been here, you've taken your parents into your home. You've taken care of their needs. You've honored them. At deep personal expense for some of you, at deep challenges for some of you. And I just want to say thank you for that example. It has been incredible to watch many of you say, I'm going to honor my parents, even though it's tough. And for others of you, I'm going to honor not my parents, but my in-laws. I'm going to take them into our home, and we're going to look after their needs. Children, one of the greatest things that you can do is honor your father and your mother. Proverbs 30:17 says this: the eye that mocks a father, that scorns an aged mother, will be pecked out by the ravens of the valley and will be eaten by the vultures. Yeah, look out. So I just got to let you guys know, we would do devotions with our kids every night before bed. We'd pray with them, and then we would say this verse. Not every night, but no, I'm just kidding. We never read that verse to them. I should have. Now that I know, that would have been great. But the point that I'm trying to make here, right, is God says, honor your father and mother. And did you catch this? That's not just a statement out of Ephesians. That's one of the 10 commandments. It's the 5th commandment. And he says, it comes with a promise that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on earth. And here's what Solomon's saying in Proverbs. To do the opposite of that, oh yeah, your physical eye may not get pecked out by a raven, but it comes with a cost. It comes with a cost. Honor your father and your mother. How do I do that? Number one, by listening to them, by hearing them out. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Give your ear to your parents. I know it's tough when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, 22, 25, right in that age. You think your parents don't know anything. Your parents are a lot smarter than you think they are. And they want to steer you, I would think most parents want to steer you in the right direction. Listen to them. Hear them out. For some of you who are older, listen to your parents and hear them out. Maybe not jump to quick conclusions about things, not cutting them off, just sitting back and listening to them. For some of you here today, the truth is you're like, you know what, I got some issues with my parents. Maybe it's time to go and have a conversation if you are capable and your parents are still alive and say, hey, I've worked through some stuff. I've been praying about this. I want a great family. And right now it's not great. And I just want to lay out what I'm struggling with. And then sit back and listen. And see what God does in the midst of that. By your courage to just be honest enough and approach something in humility by just listening to them. The second thing is by making wise decisions. You want to honor your parents? Make wise decisions. Proverbs 17:21, to have a fool for a child brings grief. There's no joy for the parent of a godless fool. A foolish son brings grief to his mother and bitterness to the one who bore him. I don't need you to raise your hands, but I know that there are many of you in here that you're like, my kids are just going down a road that I am deeply concerned with. I tell my kids all the time, you know what? Before we had children, I had a full head of hair. It was an amazing mane. It was incredible. It's beautiful. And every one of your poor decisions, no, I'm just kidding about that. But my point is, nothing makes me prouder. Not their GPA, not their achievements in sports, not their musical abilities, not all of that stuff. You want to know what makes me proud and makes me feel honored as a dad? When I watch my kids in a situation where they have a choice and they said, I chose that instead of what I maybe wanted to do or impulsively thought, and it was a wise decision. How many of you parents just love when your kids make wise decisions? Be a wise decision maker. And you go, well, how do I make wise decisions, Brian? Well, I'm so glad you asked me that. Read the book of Proverbs. Make decisions based upon God's truth. Change that. Proverbs 23, 24, and 25. The father of a righteous child has great joy. A man who fathers a wise son rejoices in him. May your father and mother be glad, and may she who gave you birth rejoice. And that's what it is all about, making wise decisions. Young people, make wise decisions. Old people, make wise decisions. Really old people, make wise decisions. It's what your parents want for you. And then I just want to conclude with a couple of thoughts for parents and grandparents here today. What can we do to build a healthy and a thriving and a dynamic home? If you go to the left quite a bit, actually, to the 5th book of your Bible, it's in Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy chapter 6. One of the famous passages in the Old Testament about family dynamics and the roles of a parent. The instruction that Moses gave to the Israelites. Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting at verse 5. It's something that is probably familiar if you've been in the church environment at all, but I think it's really important to talk through. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul, with all of your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts, and press them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands. Bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. For those of you who know Jewish heritage, that many of them still do this, but they would put the words, the commands of God on their forehead and on their wrists and on the frames of their house. They would actually have locations where that is, and some still do that even today. And that passage gives us a great framework, even in the book of Proverbs as well, of what we can do as parents. And I want to encourage you as grandparents here today, because some of you you're parenting, your kids are out of the house. You don't have that responsibility, but you have a tremendous opportunity with grandkids if God has blessed you with those. The first is this. What's a great choice? Excuse me. Fear God. Would you say that with me? Fear God. Oh, man. Hold on just a minute. Say it again. Fear God. Fear God. Yeah, I'm going to make everybody else start coughing too. Fear God. Proverbs 14:26. Whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge. Proverbs 27. The righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them. The greatest thing you can do as a parent is fear God. Put him first. Make him the priority of your life. You want to know what the second greatest thing that you can do? I heard this not too long ago, and I think it's profound advice. If you are married today, the second greatest thing that you can do as a parent, have a great marriage. And I believe that wholeheartedly. First and foremost, your relationship with God, make that great. Secondly, have a healthy, a strong, a dynamic, loving marriage that sets the tone and the example for your kids. Fear God. The second thing here is this. Strategically teach my kids. Actually, let me back up for just a moment. You can write that in. Strategically teach my kids. But I want to read this verse out of 2 Timothy 1:5. Paul is writing to Timothy. If you're familiar with Timothy, Timothy is a pastor at this time, but he says these words to Timothy. He says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now also lives in you. Did you catch the lineage there? Who's it start with? Starts with his grandmother. Your grandma set the tone, impacted your mom, who then impacted your life. Your faith has been founded on that. And grandparents, if I can just spend a few moments talking to you today, you have an incredible opportunity to invest in the lives of your grandkids, to teach them, to show them by example what it means to follow Christ. I hear this a lot, and maybe it's true. Brian, I retired, and now I'm busier more than I've ever been. And I see that some grandparents are so busy, they don't have any time for their grandkids. And you have a tremendous opportunity to start to invest spiritually in your grandkids' lives. Make that a high priority. How cool would it be that at the end of your days, somebody would say, man, my grandfather, my grandmother invested in me so well that their faith became mine. I watched it lived out in their life, and it had tremendous influence on me. Number 2, strategically teach my kids. Solomon, the whole book of Proverbs, if you read through it, it's his direction to his sons. Son, my son, listen to sound advice. My son, take my instruction. My son, do this. Listen to your father's instructions. Don't forsake your mother's teaching. Verse 8 of chapter 1. 22:6, a passage that many of us know out of Proverbs. Start children off in the way that they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And it's this dynamic of investing in them, starting to instruct them and to teach them. And we all know this, right? More is caught than taught. It's this idea of watching you. If you want your kids to become a certain thing, we should probably take the time and the energy as parents and grandparents to be living that out ourselves. That they would look at us and go, boy, that's just what they did. That's how they lived. I know many of you have heard this story before, but years ago we were at a church. I was pastoring out in the Placerville area, and I had the privilege to be out there. My son was pretty young, and we had 2 girls at the time, Kaylin and Ireland, and we were all driving along, and I remember coming back from church, and I was like, hey, guys, what'd you guys learn at church? Oh, we talked about Jesus. I'm like, oh, that's a good Sunday school answer. What else did you learn at church? Oh, we talked about the disciples, and the one that betrayed Jesus, and his name was Matthew. And I went, Matthew? What is wrong with the Sunday school teachers at our church? You know, we gotta step that up, right? It was Judas who betrayed Jesus, and it dawned on me in that moment. You know what I was doing? I was expecting the church to teach my kids. And can I be honest with you? That's not the church's responsibility. It's our responsibility as parents to educate and to train our children in the way that they should go. It's on us as parents. It's on us as the family unit. The church is here to help support that, yes, and I'm not saying that we don't want to be a part of that. But on that day, I made a determination. That's not the Sunday school's teacher's job anymore. We fired her anyway. She didn't know what she was doing. So, no, I'm totally kidding. It wasn't her fault. I'm sure she shared the right information. My kids were just, because I, oddly enough, as the pastor of the church, am thinking it's their responsibility to build up my kids in their faith. And that day, I started reading the Proverbs with Jaden every time I took him to school. He would sit in the front seat, he would read it, and we'd pick out one out. Every single day I'd take him to school. We would read through it. And then I thought, why am I not doing with this our other kids? And so from that day forward, and you guys have heard me talk about it, we do family devotions every day before school. Do my kids always love it? Yes, because I tell them they have to. So they don't. Do we have to get up? You know, and then we hit the summer. Do we have to still do it? I said, Jesus isn't taking a break. You guys should be spending time with God on your own. But I'm going to tell you, the reason I do that is not because my kids are craving it. The reason I do it is because it's my responsibility to build up my children in their faith and to be strategic about that. I want to encourage you, are you strategic about that? And are we living it out? A Reader's Digest journalist went out and he was doing a piece on the Amish people. And in his observation at the schoolyard, he noticed how the children never screamed at one another. They never yelled at each other, and this amazed him. So he ended up going and speaking to the schoolmaster, and he remarked how he had not heard one Amish child yell one thing, and he asked the schoolmaster why he thought that was so. And the schoolmaster looked at him and said, well, have you ever heard an Amish adult ever yell? And the point being, right, that we set the tone. Our example is what our children will follow. Do you pray with your kids? Or is spirituality just something that we do at church? Do we read our Bible at home? Do we do it with our children? Did you catch what it said in Deuteronomy? Talk about it when you walk along the road. Do you know what that is in our day? It's your vehicle. Talk about it when you're walking along the road and when you're sitting down, mealtime. And when you lie down, when you get up, when you're watching TV and something comes on, you're like, hey, what do you think that means? What is this? How does this equate into our faith? Tie it as symbols on your hands. Write them on the door frames of your house. Whatever that may be, to take these opportunities to strategically teach our kids. And the last one, number 3, lovingly discipline my kids. Would you say that with me? Lovingly discipline my kids. Proverbs has a lot to say about this. There's a ton of verses that I did not put in, but for the sake of space. Whoever spares the rod hates their child, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. Our children need instruction. I know that we live in a world where everybody's like, well, just let them figure it out. The Bible never communicates that. It's giving them instruction, directing their steps, and at times exercising discipline. We were hanging around after church one time, this was probably about 20 years ago, and a family who was known to have some pretty rambunctious kids. She was standing at one end of the sanctuary, and the kid was goofing around in the other corner, and she yells over, get over here, 2 or 3 times. And then I have probably never laughed so hard over a parenting thing in my life. These were her exact words. I'm going to give you, and it's literally about 40 feet away, I'm going to give you to the count of 30. I'm like, 30? We didn't have kids at the time. I'm like, even I know that that's bad parenting, right? I can figure that out. 27, 28, 29, 29 and a half. I mean, come on, 30? Our kids need discipline. They need to be shaped. They need to be structured. A young teenage boy just got his driver's license, came to his dad. He says, Dad, I want to talk to you about the car. I want to use it. And his father said, okay, well, I will let you use the family vehicle on a couple of conditions. You got to bring up your grades. You got to study your Bible a little bit more than what you've been doing. And you need to get a haircut because you've got some long, crazy hair that I'm not really thrilled with. And so after a couple of weeks, the boy had been studying the Bible regularly, got his grades up, but he didn't cut his hair. So he approached his dad. He says, Dad, so here's the deal. I think I'm ready to drive the car. He said, got my grades up. And his dad's like, you have? I've been watching that. That's great. I've been reading my Bible and studying. I've been praying pretty regularly. He goes, yeah, that's pretty good too. I've been watching that. His father said, but here's the problem. You still got this kind of long, crazy hair that I asked you to cut. And his son said, you know what, Dad, I know I've been thinking about this though, but here's the truth. Samson had long hair. Moses had long hair. Noah had long hair. And probably even Jesus had long hair too. And his father interrupted him at that point and said, yes, son. And those men walked everywhere they went. So, the reason I share that, if you're going to make a commitment and exercise some discipline, don't make empty threats. You got a hold of those things. Because a lot of us as parents, and I know we've watched videos of ourselves. I know some of you are grandparents and you're like, parents today, they're so terrible. You never made any mistakes. I know you were awesome. But we've seen some videos of ourselves. I'm like, wow, I can't believe we did that as parents. And some of us yell and scream and we threaten. And our kids don't even pay attention anymore because it's what we always do. And there's no teeth to it. And to get to a spot where we exercise some loving, keyword, loving discipline to care for them. And discipline is very different than punishment. Let me explain to you why. The purpose of discipline is to the purpose of punishment, inflict penalty for a specific offense. The purpose of discipline is your desire is to train and correct for maturity. The focus of punishing a kid, you're just getting them for their past mistakes. The focus of disciplining your child is for future and corrective actions down the road. The attitude of a parent in punishment is frustration and anger. The attitude in discipline is love and concern for your kid. The results of the emotions of your child when you punish them is fear and guilt. The results when you discipline is security and belief in self. And I say all that because some of you as parents, you hold your head high and you're like, my kids, they fear me. And the truth is, I fear you. You sometimes are a scary person. And that's not a great thing. Can I tell you what I see in a lot of Christian homes when that's the case of the motivation of why your kids obey you? Is they get off to college when you're not there and they go crazy. And I know you think, oh, I'm going to send them to a Christian school. I went to a Christian school and people were partying and using drugs and sleeping with all sorts of people. And can I tell you something? That was decades ago. I can only imagine what's going on now. Because for a short term, you can punish them and submit them, or you can lovingly discipline them. Why? Because God lovingly disciplines his kids. If we can get that last verse up here. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in. God disciplines us. He asks us as parents to discipline our kids. And aren't you great that God doesn't do it for punishment? He does it because he cares for us. Every once in a while, I get a spiritual spanking that I need, and it wakes me up to go, thank you, Lord. Thank you for doing that because you care for me. So I just asked this question: what will you do today to start building a great family? Is it making Christ the priority of your life? Maybe for some of us, it's the way that we engage with one another in home, the words that we say, the anger that is elevated. Maybe the greatest thing we could do, call a family meeting and say, we're going to change the way we're doing things to make it God's way, not our own way, because it's not producing the family that God has desired for us. Maybe you're a kid today, and honoring your folks is important. Listening to them, starting to make some wiser decisions. Maybe as a parent, to fear God, to instruct your kids. To instruct your kids. And then lastly, maybe to exercise some discipline in their life. And more than anything else, I just want to share this. I know we've said it many times, but if you're here today and you don't have Christ as the centerpiece of your home, that's what's going to make a great family. And maybe you need to be a part of God's family before you can make a great family in your own home. And if you've never experienced that before, maybe that is the greatest decision that you can walk away with today, to say, I want to be a part of God's family, to know I'm one of his sons and daughters. And there's only one way to do this. I was having a conversation with a young man last week. He walked up to me after church. He says, how do I get to know God? I said, well, in and of yourself, you can't do that, because we've all missed the mark. God is perfect, and we are here. No matter who we are, we've missed it. We all have sin. But God sent his son Jesus, and he says, are you telling me that Jesus is the only way to have a relationship with God? I said, according to the Bible, yes, it is. He says, well, I'm not sure I'm right there yet. I said, that's okay. But you got to receive Christ if you want a relationship with God, because he paid the price for you that you couldn't pay for yourself to be restored. And maybe that's your decision this morning. If you say, I am ready to take that step, I'm going to pray a prayer in just a moment that you can make that decision for the very first time. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? Father, thank you for your love and your grace, that you are a perfect Father in all of your ways. And right now, I just ask that you would help us to build healthy homes. Help us to build a healthy church in the way that we engage with one another, that we would love each other, be united with one another, that we would represent you well, and especially in our home lives. God, I pray for parents who have kids in the house. I know for some it is a tough season right now. Would you uphold them? Would you strengthen them? Would you give them courage? Would you make them the example? And God, I thank you that you are a God who is gracious with us and forgiving, that we all as parents are going to make mistakes. I know I have so many times. And thank you for your forgiveness towards me. God, I pray for the kids that are still in their homes today, that you would just continue to strengthen them to honor their parents, even at times when it is difficult and it is hard. For those of us who are grandparents in here, that we would take the time to use this season of our life to invest in our grandkids in the hopes that they would fall passionately in love with you, to teach and to instruct. God, for those of us who maybe don't have those kind of home lives, but just being a brother or a sister, a family relative, that we would seek to desire to have a great family life that brings honor to you. And if you're here right now, and maybe for the very first time you would have to say, I don't know if I've got a relationship with Christ, but I need one and I want one. If that's you and you want to begin that journey, I'd encourage you to pray maybe a simple prayer like this. God, thank you for loving me. Thank you for wanting me to be a part of your family. And I want that today. I believe, Jesus, you died for me, and I ask right now that you would come into my life and you would forgive me of all of my sin. Give me a brand new start. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.